Hey everyone, welcome to the Naked Conversations podcast. I'm your host, Sage Hobbs, author and creator of Naked Communication, and I'm so psyched you're here. This show is all about taking charge of your life in new and inspired ways to create a life you deeply love. It's about being more you in all areas of your life, more courageous, more free, more alive, more naked. I'll be sharing stories and advice from amazing people around the world who are up to incredible things on how they are successfully breaking free from fear and old patterns in order to create incredible relationships and impactful lives so that you can do the same. This is the place to be inspired to live a courageous and naked life. Let's do this. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Naked Conversations. I'm your host, Sage Hobbs. And as always, I'm so honored that you're here. Today's guest is another amazing female leader out in the world, being of service, making a difference, and finding ways to step more powerfully into who she is through her work. And I'm just so excited to introduce you to her. So a few months ago, I had the opportunity to attend a dinner party, like a grown-up dinner party without our children. And I know that sounds funny, but the season of life that I'm in, that's like a fun, special thing to do. And I had the lovely privilege of meeting Alison Malmon, who I will introduce to you here in a minute. And I was so amazed by what she has built and created, the movement that she has built and created over the last 18 years, starting when she was very young at age 21 or so, and the courage and the perseverance and the humility in the work that she's done. So Alison Malmon is the founder and executive director of an organization that's called Active Minds, which is the leading national organization that uses students as the driving force to change the perception about mental health on college campuses and now on high school campuses as well. So she formed the organization following the suicide of her only sibling, her 22-year-old brother, Brian. When she was a freshman in college and he was a senior in college, he took his own life. And she immediately realized that there was an opportunity to help others of her age not take that same path, to not struggle in silence. He was a super bright, seemingly huge future ahead of him, and nobody really knew how much he was suffering. So wanting to combat the stigma that had really caused her brother to suffer in silence and ultimately take his own life, she created a group on her college campus at the University of Pennsylvania that promoted open and enlightened dialogue around the issues. And after graduating in 2003, she formed it into a formal nonprofit organization and has since gone on to speak nationally on college campuses to various agencies and organizations and lead this organization, Active Minds, to have more than 450 chapters on campuses nationwide. She's really on a mission to transform how we speak about mental health in our country and in our discourse. She's been named top 15 global emerging social and innovators from the Washingtonian of the Year, a woman of distinction by the American Association of University Women, so many things. I've just been so blown away. And she has 3 kids, 6 and under. So to top it all off, she's juggling it all. And so today we get into some real honest conversation around what it was like to lose her brother, her only sibling. And we talk about creating a movement through her work. We talk about sort of accidental leadership and leading by example and some of the challenges she has faced in learning to grow a nonprofit organization. And we talk about storytelling and the value of storytelling to keep people's legacy alive and to learn and transform. So many good things. So please tune in, and without further ado, enjoy this conversation with Alison Malmon. And make sure to go over to the show notes at sagebhobbs.com/episode-21/episode-21 in order to find out more about Active Minds and get some of the bullet points and resources that we talk about in today's episode. Enjoy. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to introduce you to today's guest. I have with me this really bright, smart, lovely woman, Alison Malmon, whom I've recently gotten to know, and I'm so excited to share with you and have you come to know her and her work more, because it's really, really important work in the world, and it's very close to my heart, and I know many of you listening will adore her and find value in what she has to say. So thanks for being here, Alison.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks so much, Sage.
Yay. Okay, so I'm going to start with a question that I ask everyone because it's just something that I'm curious about. It's like my own little side research project, which is, what does courage mean to you?
What a great question. What does courage mean to you? I think I've been through a lot in my life, and what I've come to realize is that courage to me is doing something that just it feels hard, or it has been hard in the past, or just makes you feel a little bit outside of your comfort zone. And, courage is skiing down a mountain if you've never skied before, or courage is just willingly going into and getting out of a situation that, again, you've either experienced in the past and it was hard, or you haven't been through before, but just feels a little bit intimidating. Putting yourself into that situation, to me, is courage. And then whatever results is kind of the cherry on top.
Nice. Right. Awesome. Okay, so for those who don't know you, will you just tell me about Active Minds? Tell us about Active Minds and how it came to be. I want them to learn a little bit about you right out the gate and what it is you've built.
Sure. Active Minds is a national nonprofit organization that's headquartered in Washington, D.C., and our goal is to change the conversation about mental health. And we do that through a number of ways. We're most well known for a network of student chapters in high school and college campuses across the country, as well as national programs that bring a broader attention around mental health issues, with the idea being, let's start talking about mental health, and then let's make sure the conversation that we're having is supportive and hopeful and infuses all the right voices and really treats mental health with the same dignity and respect as every other health issue that we talk about so openly in our society. And for whatever reason, and there are many, but for whatever reason, we are just really quiet about mental health issues, which causes people who are struggling to feel alone, to feel like it's their fault, causes family members to think there's something wrong with them or their family. And we just have this undercurrent of silence around depression and anxiety and suicide and eating disorders and PTSD and you name it, that our goal at Active Minds is just to bring that conversation out of the shadows. You look at the research and you see that 1 in 4 Americans has a mental health disorder. So this is not just something that's impacting one person in every neighborhood. This is almost every family has a story around these issues. I got into this work because when I was a freshman in college, I was at the University of Pennsylvania. My freshman year, my brother took his own life. He had been a student himself who started struggling, a very successful student in an Ivy League school, who started struggling with his own mental health issues in his freshman year of college, but didn't tell anybody. Hid it from me, hid it from my social worker mom, and hid it from his friends, and ultimately ended up getting help from his counseling center, but not until his senior year. Came home, he took a leave of absence in his senior year, and then started in really intensive treatment back at home, but ended up taking his life about a year after taking that leave. And it was really those after all of this happened and kind of being thrown into this as a survivor of his suicide, learning the age of onset and really coming to understand his story and his struggle and the fact that he lived through what we're all told is supposed to be the best time of our life in pain and in isolation, and not telling anybody was my motivation to get this conversation going and create a space where other young adults didn't feel like they had to stay quiet, knew what they were going through, felt comfortable seeking help, and friends knew how to reach out to friends that they may be worried about.
Oh my gosh. Okay, I love it. Whew, I just love how much heart and soul you've poured into creating really what is a nonprofit, but it's bigger. I see it as bigger. I see it like a movement.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. That's kind of how I think of it too, is a movement, and the idea being something needs to change. And folks who are listening know when something touches you deeply, and I can't imagine doing anything else, right? Like I don't know what else I would do with my life, because this has been such a critical part of my life and my development, and then also gives me so much opportunity to learn and do more and change things for other people. It really gives a lot of meaning to everyday work, for sure.
Oh my gosh, I have so many questions from what you just said. It's incredible. So I'll just go through like little by little here and break it down with people. So first of all, I just want to know, what was your brother's name? I want to honor him.
Brian. His name is Brian. Thank
Brian.
you.
Yeah. Okay. I also feel like that's part of it, right? Like these are real people, and people who are listening, I know people who are listening have also lost loved ones to suicide or have people in their lives who struggle with mental health, for sure. And I just think, they're people. They have names and they have lives. And so you just said that this work is so close to your heart, you can't imagine doing anything else. And I'm just kind of wondering what that's like for you to have your work and your personal story so deeply connected. Like, how have you balanced that, or how has that been hard at times?
Yeah. Yes. Balance and difficulty. It was interesting because I Brian died on March 24th of the year 2000, which was my freshman year in college. I'll date myself there. And I started Active Minds on the 1.5 year anniversary of his death. So on September 24th, 2001, I held the first meeting for this organization. At the time, it's an understatement to say I was thinking about Brian all the time. Every moment of every day, I was thinking about him and the loss and everything that goes along with it. And it was exactly what I needed to do to kind of channel those thoughts into something. And then I actually distinctly remember probably 3 or 4 years after Brian's loss, after starting Active Minds, I was talking to my therapist and we were discussing the fact that I was at the point in my grief where I wasn't necessarily thinking about the tragedy every moment, but I had to be because of my work. And how, if I were to recommend it to somebody else, I'm not sure I would necessarily recommend it to somebody else at that point. But I will say that was pretty short-lived because I then got to a point, and so, he died in the year 2000. We're coming up on the 18th anniversary. It's been a while, but it quickly came to a point where I realized, if I weren't doing this work, I wouldn't be able to talk about him as much as I do. Yeah. And I have a phenomenal group of friends right now. Most of them I met in college and afterwards, and they never met Brian, and my husband and my children never met him. And if I were in a different line of work, it would always kind of be that, I don't know if it would be the elephant in the room or it just wouldn't be as open a conversation as the work that I do facilitates right now. And so I guess one of the things that I've learned kind of through the years is there's some really crappy things that can happen and that do happen in our lives. And then there's a little bit of, I don't want to say good, but there's a little bit of silver lining to everything. And by doing this work at this time, one of the silver linings is that I can and get a chance to talk openly about Brian. And I do it in a way where it's not just about his death. And that's always been really, really important to me. Brian died by suicide, but I'm not going to remember him because of his suicide. I'm going to remember who he was and the amazing big brother that he was and the mental health challenge or illness that he started struggling with in his college years, society's lack of discussion about it, and which ended up costing him his life. I'm going to talk about who he was as a person in a way that I'm not sure I would have been able to do if I were doing other work. And then also, obviously, I can think about and talk about Brian as I hear from people who have literally told us that Active Minds has saved their lives or Active Minds has changed their lives. And so to know that we can change this for other people, other sisters don't have to go through this, other families don't have to go through this, and other young adults like Brian don't have to go through this. Obviously, there's very little that can rival that kind of feeling.
Yes. So it makes sort of the complicatedness or the heaviness of it so worth it.
Yeah,
in some
so
ways.
Worth it. Yeah.
And I love this piece that you alluded to, which is kind of how I wrote it or thought of it, is that storytelling can keep memories alive.
Oh, totally. I'm such a big believer in storytelling. And we do that even when it's not about memories. I think storytelling is what impacts people and what changes people. And, we have a speakers bureau at Active Minds of young adults who have diagnosed mental health disorders who go around to high school and college and community audiences talking about their mental health disorder. Because what happens is they stand up on a stage, they look cool, they act cool, and then they say, I have bipolar disorder. And it just changes the face of what people think of when they think of a name, a word, kind of like you alluded to earlier. These are all people. And so storytelling changes the conversation about mental health, and storytelling allows us to remember all of the people in our lives, for better, for worse, and to think about all of them. But that's what really keeps their energy and their meaning and their presence really still existing in us.
Yeah, I love that so much. And for sure, I will put a link in the show notes to Active Minds, and people can check out that Speakers Bureau as well. Because I think that's, as somebody who spent 10 years as a middle school counselor, and my husband works at our local high school, there is something so powerful around peer instruction, peer conversations. And you can be the coolest adult around and still you won't have the same validity at times as somebody who looks like you, right? Who's maybe experiencing what it feels like to be like, honestly, I graduated from Penn before you even, so that dates me, right? So I know what it was like to be 21 or 20 when I was 20, but that was 20 years ago, And so there's something really powerful, I think, that you've created in tapping into the peer-to-peer discourse and the peer-to-peer support and the peer-to-peer instruction and speaking opportunities. So actually, why don't we talk about that for just a minute? So what does Active Minds look like nationally in terms of who is doing the work on the ground and how it plays out if people are curious and they want to know?
Sure. So to kind of play out my story a little bit longer, I launched Active Minds as a student group of my campus on the 1.5-year anniversary of Brian's death. And what that looked like for the last 2 years I was at school was a growing really by the end, a group of students who planned events for campus. So everything from stress relief activities to a coffee house fundraiser where we partnered with a fraternity and got local food donations from restaurants in the area, to bringing in a speaker to talk about mental health issues, to do a movie screening out on College Green. And so when I graduated from Penn, I started a nonprofit in order to develop and support other chapters of that student group on other campuses, because I too really recognized the immense need for peer-to-peer conversation around mental health. Active Minds is not a peer-to-peer support group. It's students who are coming together to plan public education events and trainings for campus and really serving as a liaison between students and the mental health community, the counseling center on campus, the local crisis text line and National Suicide Prevention Hotline, and other regional services, because you can have all the services out there, but if people don't understand what they're going through, they don't feel comfortable seeking help, they're not going to access it. And so Active Minds...
Wait, say that again, pause, because you speak about this so much and so fast. That's sort of a unique thing that you've created. So just speak to that for one more second, which is they aren't providing mental health support, but they're helping to bridge the gap between what's available and people actually using it. Exactly.
So the idea is we need to create a culture where people feel comfortable seeking out services and going to get help. They know where that help is, and they know what they're going through, and they know that it's okay to reach out for help, and that seeking out help is a sign of strength. And so Active Minds is really serving as that public education arm and public health and behavior change to connect people with mental health resources. So where we are on schools, college and high school campuses, Active Minds chapters work very closely with the counseling center and the counselors at the school. Sometimes there's a need to reach out beyond the school services because of capacity. And so our chapters are advertising the National Suicide Prevention Hotline, crisis text line, other regional services. But the idea is we got to get people comfortable seeking services and be that crutch to walk them over to the counseling center and not necessarily keep providing more or additional resources. The resources are often there. We are just not in a culture right now where people feel comfortable getting that help. And I'll say often nobody has a problem going to the doctor for the flu or going every year for a checkup, and yet the concept of going to a therapist or a social worker or even a psychiatrist is just baffling to people and terrifying to people, and it shouldn't be. Mental health is part of our overall health and well-being, and that's really the goal of Active Minds, is to create that conversation so that we can talk about this stuff as openly as all other health issues, because I feel very strongly that had my brother felt comfortable getting help in his freshman year when he really first started struggling with this stuff, his life would have taken a different course. But for him, he did seek help, which we were really lucky about, but at that point for him, it was kind of too late. And no matter what we did, his depression especially had spiraled down to a point where he had already really lost hope. And so for him, at least, it was too late. That's not the case for everybody. But so often and too often, we talk about mental illness and suicide when we've gotten to a point of crisis. Well, there's a lot that happens before crisis. And there's a lot of opportunity to get people in service and just in support early. We don't start talking about heart attacks when people are in the hospital dying. We start talking about heart health and heart disease long before. And we need to start doing that with mental health. And so that's really the role that Active Minds plays as a peer-to-peer kind of liaison and public health changing organization. So we have these chapters now on campuses, just over 450 college and high school campuses now across the U.S. And we also have about a dozen programs that we roll out both through our chapters and on national level to bring broader attention to these issues. So everything like that Speakers Bureau that we've discussed to, we have a suicide prevention exhibit called Send Silence Packing. We've collected 1,100 backpacks that represent the number of college students that die by suicide every year. And these are backpacks that have been donated to us by friends and family of individuals who have died. We have the pictures and the
Wow.
stories
Oh
of
my
the
gosh.
individuals
Wow.
laminated on the
Whoa.
bags. And yeah, I mean, if you think of it, it's kind of like the AIDS quilt for suicide prevention. We
Mm-hmm.
travel this display, which is about the size of a third of a football field, to different public spaces and college campuses, really to demonstrate both the incidence and impact of young adult suicide, but also what we can all do to help prevent it. And
Mm-hmm.
really take this upstream approach of let's just start talking about this stuff and let's learn about how to reach out to a friend. And if there is somebody in your life you're worried about, here are the simple words you can say. I'm worried about you. Do you want to talk about it? Can I walk you over to the counseling center? Not to be afraid to
Yeah.
put ideas in people's head, but instead to be a support system for them and connect them with resources.
The fact that you added, can I walk you over to the counseling center? To me, that is like a magic phrase. That's sort of the most magic in some ways, because I do feel, and I would wonder what you feel about this. I feel like young people are becoming more and more comfortable with talking about mental health than my generation or the generation before.
Yeah.
And yet still taking that step to get somebody what they actually need. Like a lot of people will say, can I help?
Right.
But
Right.
well, what if they are not equipped to help? You know what I mean? So I guess even just recently I was on social media, and I've actually taken a bit of a break from social media over the holidays time. And in general, I don't love to spend a lot of time on there, but I found it interesting that the post that popped up was an old family friend who is younger, in her 20s, and who was very openly saying, like, I'm really struggling and I want to talk about it because I want people to know that people are struggling with mental health issues,
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, how courageous, how brave. And I also thought, oh my gosh, how millennial to put that on social media, like I could, and how that aged me some. But I also thought, okay, perhaps the conversation is changing. Yay. And are we still not changing in terms of actually taking the steps to get help? And like the stigma around medication, I feel like is still pretty alive and well. And I wonder if you've seen a shift. You've been doing this now for 15 years, which is extraordinary. And I'm going to ask you some questions around that in a moment in terms of your leadership development. But have you seen a shift in how even every 5 years, kind of little micro generations are approaching the issues of mental health?
Yeah, tremendously. And I will say, when I started this back when Brian died in the year 2000, I even at that point recognized a generational shift. And a very kind of small anecdote in this is that after Brian died, I went home to my mom's house outside of DC, and I spent some time there before going back to school. And I remember maybe a week after his death, I was in my mom's living room with a handful of my friends and his friends, so 18 and 22-year-olds. We sat in silence for what felt like forever. And one friend, after, probably a minute, broke the silence and said, Alison, we don't know what you're going through. How can we help you? And at the same time, in the months preceding Brian's death, my mom lost all of her friends because they also didn't know what to say. And so they didn't say anything, and they just kind of shied away. It was really at that point that I recognized, there's already my friends want to help, but they've never been taught what to say because there's so much stigma in generations behind us or ahead of us.
Right, we got you. The older, yeah.
Never really been taught the words. And so one of the reasons I started Active Minds in the way that I did, being this student-to-student, peer-to-peer outreach, is even back then I saw a generational change. People flocked. Once I started Active Minds, I liken it off into the field of dreams. Like I built it and they came. Once I started Active Minds, the number of my peers and Brian's peers who were so interested in getting involved, really, that's how we've grown to 450 chapters. We have so little money at our organization, and we don't have the ability to be proactive. And yet we have 450 chapters because students have come to us saying, this has been part of my life, or I have a friend who has struggled, or I'm interested in psychology, and I want to change the culture on my campus. How can I help? And that I've certainly seen over the past 15 years, certainly mostly reflected in the public eye, in the public domain. Back in the year 2000, there was never a single media story about mental health or mental illness. And when it was,
wow, yeah, that's changed.
It was severe and it was negative, and it was always about mental illness. And I remember distinctly after the shooting at Virginia Tech in the year 2007, there was a big banner headline on the news site that I was looking at, major national site, that said, Cho declared mentally ill in 2005, whatever it was, as though that was why this happened, because he was declared mentally ill, creating such a discriminatory kind of viewpoint on mental illness.
Interesting.
Everybody with mental illness, there's something wrong with them and whatnot. And so what we see now in 2018, it's still not perfect, but the number of celebrities, the number of positive stories around mental health, the number of journalists who are getting it right is really helping to change the culture. And some of that, to be very honest, I think is because the generation that you and I grew up in is getting into these leadership roles, right? So some of it is media is changing because the people who are writing it are changing. And the celebrities that are coming forward are the Demi Lovatos of the world who are of the generation that we're talking about, that is just like your family friend. So I definitely have seen a tremendous shift with the next generation. And it honestly gives me a lot of hope.
Good. Yeah.
Mental health has really become this generation's social justice issue. And they are going to change it for society, and they're going to change it for all of us while they're in school, and then as they grow up in the working world, and as parents, and as policymakers, and whatever, our next president in however many years. So I've seen a lot of really, really positive change that is really pretty awesome to bear witness to.
That's so good. And for those, who are listening and know people in their lives who are struggling or in pain, I love that you have hope and that you see a shift, you know what I mean? Because sometimes I think people get really stuck in what's not working. And I really love to bring it back to where there's growth and where there's hope and where there's, advancements. And you said something that landed for me, which is that we weren't taught how to talk about these things. I got moved when you said you had a friend who broke the silence to say, we've never been there, but how can I help? I mean, that was so courageous of that friend. Because as you know, part of my work is about communication. That's my book, Naked Communication. And I think there's lots of things we haven't been taught to talk about, effectively at least. You know what I mean? And vulnerably. And a lot of that is around being scared to get it wrong. And so I wonder what you would say to this. I feel like if we're going to talk about things that are challenging, in today's times, there's a lot to talk about that's challenging.
Yeah.
There has to be some permission and some grace to do it imperfectly. Yeah. That's a part of what I love around just pulling it out of the shadows or removing the silence. And I just wonder if you could speak to that. If somebody's listening, they're like, well, what do I say? How do I do it even if I don't know exactly what to say? How would you encourage people to do it even if it's imperfectly?
Yeah, I think what you said is exactly the case. And especially around mental health, we're so afraid that we're going to do it wrong. We don't say anything at all because we think we're going to make things worse. And I guess the first thing that I will say is you never have to be afraid to ask somebody if they're thinking about suicide. It's a very big myth. Asking somebody if they're thinking about suicide is not going to force them to start thinking about suicide. Instead, it will give them permission to tell you what their thoughts have been if you can. And so if there's somebody in your life who you're really worried about their health or their safety, ask them straight out, are you thinking about suicide? And I think beyond that, any invitation that you give to anybody to just share what they're feeling and how they're doing, and for them to say, I'm not okay, is earth-shattering for so many of us, because in this social media world we live in, and just kind of in this perfect world we have to live in, when somebody says, how you doing, the answer always has to be fine or great. But I next time challenge you when somebody asks you how you're doing to actually answer the question, because by actually answering the question, you'll also give them permission to actually answer the question. A lot of this is not rocket science. A lot of this is just allowing yourself to be human and allowing the people around you to be human too, showing your vulnerability. Right. I think especially to kids and your children, letting your kids know that you don't always feel great, or you've really struggled when you were a kid too, to let them know that it's okay to feel that way. And I think the very basic conversation of how are you doing? Is there something that you want to talk about? Can I help you through something? I would caution everybody against the thought of, let me know if you need anything, because anybody who is struggling has a really hard time reaching out.
Yes.
And so if you're worried about somebody, it's not a let me know if you need anything. It's just a constant
what can I do for you? Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. And I learned that after losing Brian, when I had people who would, I'm so sorry for your loss. Let me know if I can do anything. Well, I am not going to reach out to you in my grieving nature and say, this is what you can do for me.
Right. Of course. But if you keep calling and say, hey, here's tea, here's coffee.
Exactly.
Let's grab a lunch.
You just come over and you just sit with me as I watch television or whatnot. That's what I need you to do. And I can't even articulate it.
Yes. Yes.
So just allow yourself to be present and allow the people around you to be imperfect. And know that it's okay, and you're not going to judge them if they show that imperfection.
Yes, I love that so much. You're not going to judge them if they show that imperfection. And you said something that you glossed over it because, again, you've spoken about these things so many times. It's so second nature to you now, which I love. You're in your zone. But this whole idea of just being with someone it's huge, that you would come and sit by somebody who maybe is depressed and they're binging out on Grey's Anatomy or something. And you're like, I'm coming over, I'm bringing the popcorn.
Right.
And I will say, it really takes something to be able to hold the space, to be able to be with somebody who's struggling. And so, I want to put that out there, that it's not what you're asking people to do, while simple, isn't easy necessarily. Yep. And I know, because I've been often the person who does that for people. It's just sort of one of the things that I have learned to do, and as a cancer survivor, as a therapist, as a coach,
Yeah.
And sometimes it's exhausting and sometimes it's draining. And there's so much depth and richness if you can be the one to go there with somebody, the connection, the level of love that you can cultivate, and potentially, in your case with your brother, like potentially save somebody's life,
Yeah.
But I just do want to say, like, it's simple and it's not always easy. And that goes back to courage. It sounds funny to say, oh, it could be very courageous to go and sit on the couch with somebody. Well, it can be, if that person is so damn miserable and you don't know what to do or you don't know what to say, because you're courageously sitting in your own discomfort.
Totally right. And I think the other thing that I would add to that, as somebody who's been in the caregiver role, is that you also have to know that even if you're not the person, struggling with depression, or you're not diagnosed with something, as a caregiver, that role can be so taxing and you need support yourself, right? So go and sit in that role. And then afterwards, is it that you need to go talk to a counselor, or, you need to make sure that you have an outlet for yourself as well. You don't have to have a diagnosable mental illness to need support. And sometimes it's that simple presence with somebody who is struggling that is enough to say, I need help. I need help and I need support to kind of get through this. And that's okay too. I guess that's the other piece that I've really learned over the years, is that therapy and support, and whatever therapy comes the form as, is it yoga for you, or is it, going to a counselor once a week, or is it medication, or whatever it may be, that's not just reserved for people who are ill. Just like we don't just go to the doctor when we're sick. We also go when we need probiotics, or, we need a checkup, or we just want to see how things are going.
Yeah, right.
Feel free to go and get the support that you need, even if you don't have a diagnosable illness that needs to be treated.
So I guess what's coming up for me is, like, I'm actually surprised to hear how many people still don't act. I feel like everyone I know and their mother has gone to a therapist in their life, right? A therapist, or here we live in Boulder, yoga. I mean, when you said that, I'm like, I've done all of those things myself. Yep. Including medication. After I had cancer, there was a period in my life where I suffered from massive panic attacks. And this is interesting. This is coming out right as I'm speaking it. I suffered from massive panic attacks, and I was embarrassed about it.
Yeah.
So here's the thing, right? Like, I was raised by a therapist. She wasn't a therapist all of my childhood. She was, until she moved into other things. Both my parents actually had been counselors at certain points in their career. And my point is, there was a lot of permission.
Yep.
And still, the panic attacks felt shameful to me, because here I was, a super bright, capable, Ivy League grad, living out on my own, and I had survived cancer. So what the hell was I panicking about now?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
And I just think that this is an interesting thing. Like, I actually do know so many people who have seen therapists and counselors in some capacity, although I will say I know more women than men by a lot. And I know men who should get that support and haven't. I wonder how many people are seeing somebody and they're not talking about that.
Right.
And how many people just still are embarrassed.
Yeah. I find cultural-based or community-based. I used to live in Washington, D.C. Now I'm living in Colorado, and things change where you are in the country and the kind of community you're surrounding yourself by.
Yes, that's so true.
And what we see at Active Minds is that we have these chapters across the country, and the needs, our chapters are all students who are planning events and doing trainings on campus, and the needs they're identifying for their campuses are very different depending on the community of students and population around them. So it's been fascinating for me to learn through them and through their asks and their needs. And, as you might expect, kind of the folks in the Northeast have one set of asks and needs, and folks in California and another. And then, in the middle of the country is a little bit different. And so it's been fascinating to see. But yes, there are a lot of people who are seeking out those services left and right. And then there's still a lot of communities where it's just not okay. And I think, as you discussed, it can largely be gender-based, cultural-based,
privilege,
economic. Exactly. We have a far way to go in order to really change this for everybody.
Yeah.
But every little piece that we're doing is helping kind of the greater society, I think.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's such important work. So I want to ask a little bit. I'm going to shift gears just a little bit, because you're super modest in the time that I've met you. And I really, part of my work and mission in the world is that all women find their voice, use their voice powerfully and effectively, step into making a difference, being of service in their families, their communities, and beyond, right? And that I really have like a core belief that we all are of value and have value to give, like every human being. That's something I believe in. And so here you are, and you are not even yet 40, and you downplay what you've created in some ways, like you've really built a sustainable nonprofit organization that has existed now officially for 15 years as an NGO. Yeah. And while you say the budget is limited, I know that you have grown your organization to many full-time employees, or several, I'll say, and that you are able to sustain this work nationally is extraordinary. I'm sure you know how many nonprofits start and fail or don't grow. Yep. And what that means is that they don't have the impact that they set out to have, right? So I just wonder if you could speak about some of the challenges you faced growing your own nonprofit and how you've kept going in the face of that. I'm going to start with that. And I have another one, but that's the one that I want to start with.
Thank you. As I said, I started Active Minds literally right after I graduated. I graduated in May of 2003, and by August, I was filing the paperwork to form a corporation, which was then going to become a nonprofit. While I went to Penn, which was a lovely school, I did not take a single business class. I had never worked at a nonprofit. I honestly had no idea what a nonprofit was and how it was different from anything in the corporate world.
You're an accidental leader.
Right. Mm-hmm. And I attribute a lot of the success to dumb and blind luck, as well as a lack of training. I actually think has helped me greatly. I'm somebody who needs to always know that things are going well, and I loved getting A's in school, and that was my jam in high school and college. And now I had nothing to fall back on other than my gut, and not being handicapped by theories and books and whatnot, I think actually really helped when I felt so passionately about a topic. And truly, I knew what Brian needed when he was my age, and I wanted to create that. But then I had to really teach myself what it meant to start a nonprofit, what bylaws were, what a board of directors was, and all of that. Certainly, challenges abound, and starting from being a 22-year-old woman trying to start a nonprofit and get funding for it, dealing with all of the discrimination that can come with being my age and my gender.
Speak to that a little bit for us, would you? Because that's coming up more and more. Women are on the rise, and even in the nonprofit sector. I mean, I know that what the statistics are abysmal for venture capitals, but in the nonprofit sector, which is more of a philanthropic base, what did that look like as a woman and such?
I still did. In the beginning, when I was trying to find people to financially support the organization, what you tend to end up going to are wealthy business people. And those wealthy business people at the time and still tended to be older men. And so I think, my age was a large portion of it, taking away gender. The fact that I was fresh out of school and I didn't have the training and the years of experience that they all saw in themselves and their peers didn't give people much confidence in me. And then certainly being a woman, I went into every situation knowing that I was coming in a little bit as the underdog. But in many ways, I ended up thriving off of that, because it gave me a chance to be like, I'm going to prove them wrong. Like, I want to get into this conversation, and I want them to leave being impressed. Because if they were impressed, I know they're not impressed because of my age. They're not impressed because of my gender, right? Like, I've surpassed all of that and impressed them enough about the critical nature of doing this work and me as a leader that it actually is worthy of something. And I don't know how that developed. I think it just had to develop naturally, or else you just get handicapped by it. And I have found that, I think, over the years too, leading any business, any organization, the number of ups and downs and the severity of the ups and downs that we've experienced over the past 15 years is really indescribable. And I think what it's taught me is just kind of resilience and being okay with change and having kind of an entrepreneurial nature that I never really thought or knew I had before, because it really happened into this. And so while I would say, some things were major challenges early, they became like part of the story later on. So everything from, I was so fortunate a handful of years ago to get a donation, a pledge of $1 million to this organization. And we were at the time a $300,000 organization, right? So this was
huge,
extraordinary. Yes. And I had spent months cultivating this person and whatnot, but we got this pledge and it was unreal. And then where we expected we were told the money was going to continue, it didn't. And so we spent the money as we were told to do in the organization, and then it went away. And so then I was faced with the budget shortfall of $500,000 a year to try to figure out how I'm going to fill in order to keep my staff going. So really pretty major things have come throughout the course of the organization's development, but it makes the wins and the good things like that much sweeter when you get through the tough things. And I think the tough things in life help with tough things in business life and vice versa. And so it all, you just kind of grow as a person throughout the whole process and recognize what is important and what's not important and what can you learn from the situation and just kind of move forward on.
Right. And you have such an optimistic sense of persistence and perseverance. It's like really, I mean, I would say that's probably one of your leadership attributes, right? Like when you said I had to rely on my gut, I'm thinking, well, and your heart. Like you went big from a heart-centered place. Yeah. And then when you said, well, I'm just going to approach these situations knowing I'm kind of coming in with a handicap, I'm going to approach it like a challenge that I can prove them wrong and that they leave impressed almost despite that I'm a woman and I'm young.
Right.
And to me, what also came up for me there is, wow, women do have to work harder.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, that's just a fascinating piece of evidence that you took it on as a challenge to be one, which is awesome. And before that, Active Minds gets to thrive and people get to have lives saved. But what an interesting notion that it has to be as such still, that it has to be that you have to work extra hard to impress. So let's just talk about leadership for a minute here. Like to me, you're clearly a leader in the mental health advocacy space. How do you see leadership? And did you feel that that was like an obvious or natural path for you?
No. I mean, I truly had no idea what I was going to do with my life.
Okay, so for those who are listening, there's hope in that regard as well. You too are a leader somewhere inside.
Somewhere inside. I will tell you the only leadership experience I had was that I was the co-captain of my high school varsity cheerleading squad. So there you go for
then everybody can make their jokes now. Right? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But no. And it's funny because when people ask me that question, again, I'm not trained. I'm not trained in anything. I have a BA in psychology and sociology from a wonderful school that taught me nothing but to go to grad school with those degrees. And so
right. Although you're definitely trained, Alice. I'm sorry. The coach in me is like, time out on that language. You get a little free coaching here.
Fair.
You are trained in the school of life, and you always had a lot of diligence and perseverance because you were a competitive athlete beyond high school. I know you went and continued to do that in college, and you persisted and you had a dual major, and your majors were in service of others, psychology and sociology or people skills. So I'm just going to call you out on that. Like, yes, maybe you don't have the PhD in blankety blank blank, but there's something to be said for the experience that you attained that is profoundly relevant, perhaps more than any class you could have ever taken, in what it takes to persist and build a movement and an organization.
Totally.
That being said.
Yes, I appreciate that. And as I said before, I honestly see that as a strength because I think so many of us can be so handicapped by needing more schooling what
that
we
don't
learned
start.
in school.
Yeah.
Right. We just get so paralyzed and fearful. And then once we do have the skills or the training, quote unquote, we're paralyzed by what we learned and say, well, I could never do it that well. And so, I joke about the fact that I'm not what we would call academically trained, but I do think that's what has helped me the most. The challenge is when I'm asked about leadership, I have no theoretical words to use or models to use or any of that. I will say, not only am I not academically trained, to be very honest, I'm not a huge reader of stuff either. I love learning, but I learn through experience and not necessarily through others and written word in a very interesting way. And so I think there's a lot to be said for that gut. And when I do read, I'm trying to learn more about what's going on around me so that I can make decisions that have nothing to do with what I'm reading, but I can make decisions that really feel right to me. And so, what leadership has meant to me is, well, certainly for anybody who started their organization, entrepreneurship is a bear, right? And you really don't know what it means to start something until you do it. I had no idea what I was doing until I got into it. I was fortunate to be 22 when I started, and so I had the energy. I didn't have a family. I was able and willing to eat ramen for a couple of years because I had no salary. There were some circumstances that really helped me through it. But getting through that entrepreneurial, the beginning time, and then recognizing that, hell, I got through that, and I've created something that's meaningful to me and is meaningful to other people and has a chance for success. And so leadership is just that tenacity of working a ton, finding people who are smarter than I am and more creative than I am and more capable than I am to bring onto our team so that they can do really incredible work on behalf of the work that we do, and really giving them the space to do that work, to be thoughtful about the work that we're doing and to do it. And then, kind of figuring out how it all gels and how to keep everybody motivated to keep moving ahead, even when we're in this tough situation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, it's just, and it's that cliche, like leadership by example. Again, that's the only way I know how to lead, because I don't know what other leadership styles there are, but I really do believe like you're going to get really good people to help you when you are genuinely you. You show your struggles and your triumphs, and you keep pushing yourself forward. So everybody else, feels like they want to be pushing forward too.
Awesome. I love that. I mean, that's my thing. I always say, I love that, but it's true. I really do. I get so excited. I mean, that leadership is tenacity. I love that way you phrase that. And this is quite, I won't digress too much, but this is quite a feminine style of leadership also, to match the tenacity with the creating and cultivating of a really genius team, and trusting that they can deliver your vision as well or better than you. That is, it's a leadership of collaboration that I think women can be particularly good at. And it's not that I don't love men. I love men. I love my man. I love the hustle and the drive that sometimes they bring too. But when you can also look for opportunities for others to shine, I think that's probably one of the reasons you really had success.
I will say that the thing that I am the most proud of, and in some ways the only thing I can take credit for, is hiring the right people into our small team. And it's true. I mean, we are who we are because of the people who have been part of Active Minds over the years. And I feel like I've learned how to hire and meet the right people and, all of that, and then really let them take this work kind of to the next level.
That's awesome. I'm totally going to work on you, though, about taking credit for more, just so you know. It's coming your way. But I love that you honor that piece. That's huge. So a couple, these are the things that are lingering for me. Well, there's a million, but this one is, you mentioned family, that you started before you had a family. And I find it a particularly interesting fact about you that I know others listening, my audience, will as well, which is you have 3 kids who are under the age of 6, right? Like, is your oldest?
I do. Our oldest is 6. Our oldest just turned 6.
Okay. Your oldest just turned 6, right? And your husband works very full-time outside of the home as well.
Yep.
And your work has you speaking at national events and college campuses and such, organizations, associations around the country, traveling.
Yeah.
How the heck do you approach this like elusive idea of balance?
It's such a good, I don't know. I mean, for everybody, it's going to be different. For me, I know that I do better being a working mom. Like I'm personally happier, and thus my kids are going to get more out of me. And so I'm fortunate that I don't often feel conflicted by, I wish I were home with my kids, but I have to be at work. Part of that too is that I love the work that I do, right? So again, I feel very fortunate in that space. But we juggle. I'm a calendar person and type A, and my husband is not. And so, we balance each other in that way. And I don't know, so far it's worked. I've had to leave my kids long before, overnight, long before most people typically do. But I've become okay with it because the coming back is amazing. And, when my baby saw me yesterday after being away for a week, just to see the look on her face was like, I would never wish to be away for a week from her again, but like that was amazing look. So, part of it again is just finding the good in the situation that it is, wanting to take care of this work baby that I have. I often joke that it was my first baby, and then my other 3, are there too.
And there's some real truth to that in the work that you do. This is something that's so close to your heart. Yeah.
I feel lucky in that I don't feel conflicted between work and home as much, because I love them all dearly and deeply.
Yeah.
And that said, when I don't have to be working, like it's my family through and through. And with 3 kids, you have no choice but to be juggling a child at any given time and making sure they're healthy and happy and whatnot.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just love the permission you're giving there. Like, I just want to say that. I want to reiterate that point, which is, whenever I feel like the women's liberation movement has gotten a little wonky in the ways that somehow women have made each other wrong in our choices.
Yeah.
And that the movement was really about choices, like that we have freedom, we have choice, we have voice, we have power, we have a say. and the movement continues, right? The feminist movement or whatever people want to call it. I mean,
Yep.
I'm proud to say I'm a feminist, but
Yeah.
whatever language works for you, to me, and I have to manage this for myself too, because I've always worked since I had kids as well. And it's a really important part of who I am. And I often joke that I would be like the worst full-time stay-at-home mom. Like I'm not even, I'm like not even good at certain things involved in managing the household. But I like to have the blend. Like I like part-time, sort of my jam and where I find my sweet spot. But we have made each other wrong for all of the, either you stay home and, that's okay, or you go to work and that's not okay. And I just feel like if we can have more permission, that there's a million ways to be a great parent and there's a million ways to show up in the world as a woman, like that is a beautiful thing. And I am really clear that we need more women in leadership and whatever that looks like, and sometimes that leadership, like there's a mom at my son's school who runs our, like the equivalent of the PTO. It's not called that, but whatever. Right. And she is a badass, she's an incredibly bright, competent woman who had prior career, and she has taken that on in a way that like I'm just not, I'm not going to.
Right.
And I'm grateful for her showing her leadership there.
Yep.
And that there's like a place for all the ways, you know what I mean? So I'm grateful to hear you say. I think it's brave, actually, and courageous to say like I actually don't feel conflicted. Like I love that you said that. Because I feel like we're supposed to feel conflicted. Well, what if we don't? Like what if we're like, actually I love our work and I love my kids and that's cool.
That's totally what it is, right? It's just like, I feel like I should feel conflicted because everybody I know either does or is in the other space. And I just feel fortunate that I just feel fine with my, and I have to juggle the family around me who doesn't necessarily agree or the friends who don't, but at the same time, to each his own. And I have figured it out with my family, with my husband and my children. And so to me, as long as we're all in a good place, then that's really what matters.
Yeah, it's great. And that's a whole nother topic, but I love that you are aligned with your husband. I spend a lot of time talking to my clients about things like that. Like how do we get aligned with the people in our lives, right? So, okay. So my final two things that I just want to leave with are, one, how can people find out more about Active Minds? Obviously, I'll put a link on the show notes at sagebhobbs.com/podcast. But if they want to make a contribution or get involved, how can they do that? And then the second thing I really would love for you to leave us with is, if you had a magic wand or fairy dust, I live with 2 kids, right? So how would you like us to be talking about mental health? Like what would the new narrative be? Those are my final questions for you today.
Love them. So the easy one, find out more about Active Minds on our website, which is activeminds.org. On the website, you can find where we have chapters and presence at different schools, but you can also find out how to bring one of our speakers or a suicide prevention exhibit to your school or community. All the information about donations are on there as well. We are entirely privately funded organization, so all the work that we do and our presence on campuses is all based on the donations that we receive from individuals, both $5 donations and $5,000 donations. It's all immensely helpful. So all of that information is readily available on our website, as well as my team and other ways to find out what else is going on at the organization.
Awesome.
And then my magic wand and fairy dust. To be very honest, I just want us talking about depression and not having a good day emotionally in the same way we talk about feeling sick. I want my kids to be able to say, Mom, I don't feel well. Like I can't get out of bed today because they have the flu. Just like they can tell me that when they're struggling emotionally. And I want somebody to be able to call into work to take a sick day, both because they have strep and because they are struggling with their anxiety that day. And the resources are there, the services are there, and are competent. People feel comfortable getting those services. And we just, there's a good friend of mine has a phrase, I dream of the day when I'm talking about my depression isn't brave at all. It's just talking. And that's really what it is. Like dream of the day where it's not courageous and it's not brave for me to talk about my brother's suicide and his illness and struggles that I've been through, when it's just talking about myself and talking about my family. And we have a lot of steps to take. We have to make sure that mental health care is covered by insurance and is given in good quality. We need to make sure that general practitioners know about mental health and depression and suicidal ideation and all of that, because they're often the first line of defense for people who are seeking help. And we also just need to make sure that people know that it's okay to reach out to friends that they're worried about or family that they're worried about, It makes nobody weak. It makes nothing wrong in the family. It's like a diabetes, and it's like the flu, and it's like any other issue that we are all dealing with, or we all know people dealing with, that we're not embarrassed by right now. It's my dream that we will get to the point where we don't have to be embarrassed by issues around mental health as well.
I love it. Perfect. It's just the beautiful way of saying that talking about my brother's suicide won't be courageous. It'll just be
talking.
Talking. Yeah. That's great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being on the show. I'm really, honored to know you and to watch you shine as a woman in the world who's just decided to take something that it's like a conversation whose time has come, and amplify it so courageously. It really does take something. So thanks for being on. And I will definitely make sure to have people I know check out Active Minds.
Awesome. Well, I thank you so much. It's an honor and a pleasure, and I love talking with you. And I just really appreciate the platform that you're giving to this topic and to Active Minds, and the opportunity to talk with you about it.
Awesome. Thanks, Alison.
Thank you, Sage.
Thank you so much for listening to Naked Conversations. Yay! It really means the world to me every time you show up. And if you want to know more about how to work with me personally and my coaching, you can check that out over at sagebhabs.com. You can also get some great free resources over there about how to make powerful requests, and many blog posts full of resources for living a naked life, as well as grab a copy of my book, Naked Communication, Courageously Create the Relationships You Really Want. And lastly, keep the conversation going with us over in the Facebook community, sagebhabs.com/Facebook, where we can keep talking about these super important and powerful topics of living a life fully expressed. Thanks again. See you next time.